Picture this. It is December 1939. A 16-year-old refugee fleeing the rising tide of fascism in Europe has just landed in the United States.
Right.
He has no money. The world is literally on the brink of a massive war, and his future is it's a complete blank slate.
Yeah, a terrifying position to be in.
Exactly. And to survive, he doesn't just put his head down and, look for a minimum wage job. Instead, he sits down and writes a letter directly to the First Lady of the United States,
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Eleanor Roosevelt, asking her to fund his college education. And today, our mission in this deep dive is to explore how that incredibly audacious teenager grew up to literally change the chemical makeup of human society.
It really is an unbelievable trajectory. I mean, we're talking about a man who he didn't stay in one lane.
No, not at all.
He went on to synthesize the key ingredient in the birth control pill. He helped pioneer some of the earliest artificial intelligence, invented a radically new kind of bug spray, and then,
just when you think his career is totally mapped out, he completely reinvents himself as an acclaimed playwright and novelist.
yeah, the ultimate multidisciplinary mind.
Truly. So we are looking at a stack of biographical sources today, focusing on the life of Carl Djerassi. Okay, let's unpack this, because if we want to understand how this guy eventually bridged the rigid, peer-reviewed world of chemistry and the messy, emotional world of the theater, we really have to understand the crucible he came from.
And that crucible was Vienna in the 1920s and 30s. He was born there in 1923, and it was a deeply intellectual environment. I mean, he actually attended the exact same school that Sigmund Freud had gone to years earlier.
Oh, wow. Okay. No pressure there.
Right. And his father was a Bulgarian dermatologist. His mother was an Austrian dentist and physician, and both were Jewish.
Okay, so highly educated, but obviously in a very dangerous place and time.
Exactly. Now, his parents divorced when he was young, and he stayed in Vienna with his mother. But of course, the geopolitical situation was just deteriorating rapidly.
Yeah. Right, 1938 rolls around, the Anschluss happens, Nazi Germany annexes Austria, and suddenly being a Jewish teenager in Vienna isn't just difficult, it's a literal matter of life and death.
Yeah, and Austria refused him citizenship. So his parents pull off this incredibly strategic, desperate, bureaucratic maneuver.
Wait, what do they do?
Remember, they're divorced, but they briefly remarry specifically to game the system.
You're kidding. They faked a remarriage just for the paperwork.
Yes. That paperwork loophole allows Karl and his mother to escape the Nazi regime and flee to Sofia, Bulgaria, where his father was living at the time.
It's a literal life-saving technicality.
Wow. But he doesn't stay in Bulgaria for very long, does he?
Only about a year. But Djerassi, he doesn't waste a second of that year. He attends the American College of Sofia, where he becomes completely fluent in English.
Which is huge.
It is. Because that isn't just a fun extracurricular. It becomes the vital tool that allows him to navigate his next escape. By the end of 1939, he and his mother arrive in the United States, practically penniless. And this is where that hustle I mentioned at the top really kicks into gear. Because he arrives in the U.S., and since his high school was called the American College of Sofia, there's this massive clerical misunderstanding.
Right. The local authorities just see college on his transcript.
Exactly. They think he already has some college under his belt, so they accidentally enroll this 16-year-old kid in Newark Junior College before he's even officially finished high school.
And he just runs with it. I mean, he completes a year there, but he knows that to actually get anywhere, he needs a proper 4-year degree. The problem is, he has zero money to pay for it.
Which brings us to that letter to Eleanor Roosevelt. He basically writes to the White House asking for room, board, and tuition. It's like a 16-year-old today cold emailing the CEO of a Fortune 500 company asking them to pay their rent.
And the crazy part is it works. He actually gets a response from the Institute of International Education. And they set him up with a full scholarship to Kenyon College.
That is just phenomenal.
Yeah, he goes to Kenyon, graduates summa cum laude, briefly works at SIVA, developing an early antihistamine called pyrrobenzamine.
Getting right to work.
Oh, yeah. And by 1945, he earns his Ph.D. in organic chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His thesis was actually on the transformation of testosterone into estradiol.
Okay, I have to stop you here, though, because I just don't get it.
What part?
Most people who survive trauma like that, fleeing regimes, gaming border bureaucracy, barely scraping by, they usually just want a quiet, stable life once they find safety.
That's true.
So why does he immediately start chasing the absolute hardest, most complex problems in organic chemistry? Did that early experience of having to hustle for survival shape this relentless drive?
That is a great question, and it points to a core pattern in Djerassi's life. He turned extreme adaptability into an engine for discovery.
Adaptability as an engine. I like that.
Yeah, he didn't just survive his circumstances, he actively manipulated them. Whether it was leveraging his parents' remarriage, utilizing his English skills, or, having the audacity to write the first lady.
He didn't see walls.
Exactly, he saw puzzles. And chemistry, at its core, is the ultimate puzzle. You're manipulating the basic building blocks of reality to create something entirely new.
Okay, so he survives through pure adaptability. But adaptability only gets you so far in chemistry. Eventually, you need a lab, you need the right tools.
You do.
Which leads to a truly bizarre career move. In 1949, he takes a job as the associate director of research at a company called Syntex. But Syntex isn't in Boston or London or New York. It's a small pharmaceutical company in Mexico City.
Yes.
Why on earth does a rising star chemist move to Mexico City?
Because of a machine. Specifically, Syntex had acquired a remarkably rare cutting-edge piece of equipment called a DU spectrophotometer.
Okay, I have to admit I am completely lost here. What exactly is a DU spectrophotometer, and why would you uproot your entire life for it?
So think of it as a chemical fingerprint reader. When you're trying to build complex molecules, you need to know exactly how the atoms are arranged.
Okay, makes sense.
A spectrophotometer shoots specific wavelengths of light through a chemical sample. Different molecular structures absorb light in distinctly different ways.
Oh, I see.
So, by reading how the light is absorbed, a chemist can literally see the invisible structure of the molecule they are working on. In the late 1940s, having access to one of these was a massive competitive advantage.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Choosing to move to Mexico City just for this machine is like a modern software engineer deciding to take a job at some tiny, unknown startup solely because they have exclusive access to a massive quantum computer.
That is a perfect analogy.
I mean, does this show that major historical breakthroughs are sometimes just the byproduct of a scientist wanting to play with the coolest new toys?
What's fascinating here is it absolutely does. Great minds are drawn to the edge of what's possible, and the tools define where that edge is. Djerassi knew that to solve the hardest puzzles, he needed the best fingerprint reader.
Right. And he originally went down there to work on synthesizing cortisone from a Mexican wild yam, right?
Yeah, he did. But that yam research laid the foundation for his most famous discovery. By 1951, Djerassi, working alongside a Mexican chemist named Luis Miramontes and a Hungarian-Mexican chemist named George Rosenkrantz, they co-invented a compound called norethisterone.
Which is the molecule that changes the world.
Precisely. And to understand why it changed the world, you have to understand the mechanism of human hormones.
Okay, break it down for us.
Natural progesterone is the hormone that regulates a woman's reproductive cycle.
Yeah.
Scientists knew that if you could introduce extra progesterone, you could essentially pause ovulation.
So they knew the theory. What was the holdup?
The problem was delivery. If a woman took natural progesterone orally, her digestive system would completely destroy it before it could do anything. It was useless as a pill.
So you'd have to rely on constant injections, which is that's not practical for daily birth control.
Right. But norethisterone was a synthetic analog. Djerassi and his team essentially built a chemical decoy.
A decoy?
Yeah, it mimicked natural progesterone perfectly, but its structure was robust enough to survive the brutal environment of the human stomach and liver. It remained highly potent even when swallowed.
Wow. And that stability changes everything. But he didn't just invent the pill in a vacuum, right? He synthesizes it, but it has to actually get to the public.
Exactly. And this illustrates how science actually functions in the real world. It's an ecosystem. Djerassi always bristled when the media called him the sole father of the pill.
Because it wasn't a solo effort?
No, he created the molecule. But it took biologists like Gregory Pincus and Min-Chu Chang to test it in animals, and a gynecologist named John Rock to actually conduct the human trials.
Right. It required a massive relay race across multiple disciplines to turn that synthetic molecule into the first combined oral contraceptive. But let's be real, even if it was a team effort, Djerassi definitely reaped the rewards. I was reading through the sources, and the wealth he generated from Syntex's success was just staggering. He bought a massive tract of land in California, started an entire cattle ranch, and named it SMIPE.
Do you know what SNIPE stood for?
I do, and it is the ultimate flex. It stands for Syntex Made It Possible.
Yeah, he really went for it.
He names his sprawling estate after his corporate triumph. I mean, he's got the ranch, he's incredibly wealthy, he's a professor at Stanford, he's pioneering new mass spectrometry techniques. He ends up publishing over 1,200 scientific papers in his lifetime. The guy has won capitalism and science.
He really had.
He could have just retired and stared at his cows.
But a mind that runs that hot doesn't just switch off.
Hmm.
Without a puzzle, it overheats. By 1968, he starts an entirely new company called Zoicon, and they aren't making medicine for humans. They're making bug spray.
Okay, bug spray. But knowing Djerassi, this isn't just a can of toxic poison you buy at the hardware store.
Not at all. Zoicon focused on what they called environmentally soft pest control. At the time, standard pesticides were just broad-spectrum neurotoxins.
Right, they just killed everything.
Exactly. They killed the pests, but they also poisoned the birds, the fish, the soil. Djerassi's team took a totally different approach. They looked at insect growth hormones.
How does that actually work in practice?
They synthesized compounds that disrupted the insect's natural metamorphosis. Insects go through stages, right? Larva, pupa, adult.
Sure.
Zoicon's chemicals essentially flooded the environment with a hormone that told the insect's body, do not mature.
Oh, that's brilliant. It's like Peter Pan bug spray.
Yes.
You trap the insects in a permanent state of childhood. If they never grow into adults, they can never reproduce, and the population just quietly collapses without you ever having to spray a single drop of toxic poison into the ecosystem.
Exactly. It was highly targeted chemical warfare. But while he's running this pesticide company and teaching at Stanford, he's also doing something else.
Of course he is.
Going back just slightly to 1965, Djerassi teams up with Joshua Lederberg, who was a Nobel laureate, and Edward Feigenbaum, a computer scientist.
Yeah.
Together, they create something called Dendrol.
Dendrol.
Yes. This system is widely considered a prototype for expert systems, making it one of the very first applications of artificial intelligence in biomedical research.
Okay, if you're listening to this and wondering how a guy who spends his days staring at Mexican yams and insect hormones suddenly pivots to coding artificial intelligence in the 1960s, you are not alone.
It sounds like a massive leap.
It does. I was completely lost here. How does a chemist build an AI? Isn't that an unbelievable pivot?
It looks like a pivot until you look at the mechanism of what Dendrol actually did. Djerassi was a pioneer in mass spectrometry.
Okay, remind me what that is.
Simply put, it's a technique where you take an unknown molecule, you smash it into tiny pieces, and you weigh those broken pieces.
Literally just weighing the fragments.
Yes. And the chemist's job is to look at the weights of all those fragments and mathematically reconstruct the original unbroken molecule. It is mind-numbingly complex, tedious math.
Wow, that sounds awful.
Djerassi realized that humans are actually terrible at holding all those possible combinations in their heads, but computers are perfect for it.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, he didn't pivot away from chemistry to dabble in AI. He realized his chemical puzzle was essentially an algorithmic problem. So he helped design an expert system that possessed the logical rules of chemistry to solve those structural puzzles faster than any human ever could.
So the AI was just a specialized hammer he built because he was tired of hitting the chemical nail with his bare hands.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how true innovation often happens when you apply the tools of one discipline to the bottlenecks of another.
That makes total sense now.
And the scientific community certainly recognized his genius. I mean, he won the National Medal of Science, the National Medal of Technology, the Wolf Prize in Chemistry.
But there is a glaring omission in that trophy cabinet, isn't there?
The Nobel Prize. The Nobel Committee never awarded him one, and he is widely considered one of the most notable snubs in the history of the award, given the sheer societal impact of the oral contraceptive pill.
Which is wild when you think about how much the pill shifted global demographics and economics. But he did make another very different kind of list during his career.
Oh, yes, he did.
He ended up on Richard Nixon's infamous enemies list, the political hit list compiled by the Nixon administration. And the funniest part is he didn't get a formal letter or anything. He found out he was on the list by reading the San Francisco Examiner over breakfast.
Which just highlights the intense contradictions of the era. You have a man who is celebrated by the government's scientific institutions, literally winning medals from the president, while simultaneously being targeted by the political wing of that same government.
Just because of the friction between progressive, outspoken academics and the administration at the time. Staggering irony. But as we move into the 1980s, Djerassi he's conquered molecules, he has built computational AI tools, he has wealth, land, prestige. But according to the sources, he hits a wall.
He does.
He realizes that delivering technological benefits just isn't enough for him anymore.
Right. In 1985, he explicitly states that he wants to lead one more life. He says he wants to leave a cultural imprint on society, rather than just a technological benefit.
So he pivots again.
He makes the most dramatic pivot of his life. He turns to the arts. He actually invents an entirely new literary genre that he dubs science and fiction.
Wait, not science fiction. Science and fiction, what's the distinction there?
It's important. Science fiction is about, aliens and faster than light travel. Science and fiction, as Djerassi defined it, is about the real, grounded day-to-day lives of actual scientists. He wrote novels like Cantor's Dilemma and The Bourbaki Gambit. He wanted to show the world that scientists aren't these emotionless logic machines in white coats. He wanted to expose their intense rivalries, their insecurities, and above all, the brutal struggle for priority.
Priority meaning who gets the credit first.
Exactly, the desperate race to be the first one to get credit for a discovery.
So what does this all mean? Why write fiction? The guy has 1,200 peer-reviewed papers. Is it possible that a fictional novel or a stage play is actually a better vehicle for telling the truth about the scientific community than an academic journal?
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally communicate knowledge. Djerassi argued that the natural sciences operate in a monological environment.
Monological, meaning a monologue.
Right. Think about a scientific paper. By design, you have to strip out the ego. You edit out the jealousy, the moral compromises, the screaming matches in the lab at 2 a.m. You just present the pristine, objective data. It's a monologue.
Yeah, nobody publishes a paper saying, I fudged this data slightly because I hate my rival at Harvard. Yeah.
Exactly. But theater, literature, those are dialogical environments. They require dialogue. They thrive on conflict and human flaws. Theater allows you to explore the messy psychology that actually drives scientific discovery.
Which totally explains his transition from novels to science and theater. He starts writing plays that directly tackle the ethical landmines of his own field.
Yes. For example, he wrote a play called An Immaculate Misconception. It deals directly with the ethics of an in vitro fertilization procedure known as ICSI, which stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly is ICSI?
Sure. In traditional IVF, you place an egg and thousands of sperm in a dish and essentially let nature take its course.
Right.
In ICSI, a scientist uses a microscopic needle to physically inject one single specific sperm directly into the center of an egg. It bypasses natural selection entirely.
Oh, wow.
Djerassi's play explores the profound moral weight of that action. What happens when a human being, not nature, is making the ultimate biological choice?
He's putting the moral dilemma on stage because a medical journal simply cannot capture the sheer existential dread of playing God with a microscope.
Precisely. He also wrote a play called Oxygen, which is a historical drama about the priority struggle between the chemists Priestley, Lavoisier, and Scheele over who actually discovered the element oxygen.
Again, who gets the credit?
Exactly. And a major recurring theme in his theatrical work was highlighting the systemic erasure of women in science.
That's fascinating.
He recognized that academic history books often scrub the marginalized figures out of the narrative, and he used the emotional power of art to put them back in the spotlight.
It's like you realize that you can synthesize a chemical to cure disease, but you cannot synthesize a chemical to cure arrogance or jealousy or ethical blindness.
No, you can't.
To cure those, you have to hold a mirror up to society. And speaking of the messy, emotional human experience, we really cannot fully understand Djerassi's legacy without addressing a profound personal tragedy that forced his two worlds to collide.
No, we really can't. In 1978, his daughter, Pamela, who was a gifted poet and artist, tragically committed suicide.
It's just devastating.
It was a shattering blow to him.
You look at his life up to that exact moment. He has spent his entire existence synthesizing solutions. He could manipulate molecules to prevent human pregnancy. He could disrupt insect metamorphosis. He could build algorithms to map the unknown. But you cannot synthesize a cure for grief in a lab.
You really can't.
There is no mathematical equation that brings your daughter back.
There isn't. And that realization forced a massive shift in his worldview. He was guided through this period by his wife at the time, Diane Middlebrook, who was a brilliant English professor and biographer at Stanford.
Oh.
She helped him see a new path for his resources. Prior to this, Djerassi had used his immense wealth to amass an incredible, world-class private art collection, specifically the works of Paul Klee.
Right, so he was essentially collecting the art of dead men.
Exactly. Middlebrook helped him realize that if he wanted to genuinely honor Pamela's memory, he shouldn't just collect dead art. He needed to support living artists.
So he takes that massive cattle ranch in California, the Suzup Ranch, the very land bought with staggering wealth generated by the birth control pill, and he completely shuts down the ranching operation.
He does.
He converts the barns, the houses, the sweeping landscapes into residential and workspaces. It becomes the Djerassi Resident Artists Program.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the ultimate poetic synthesis of his life's work. The financial capital generated by his rigorous, objective scientific triumphs literally became the soil, the sanctuary to nurture the fluid, creative, artistic passions that his daughter loved.
Wow.
It was his way of transforming paralyzing pain into a living, breathing legacy. And true to this new philosophy of sharing rather than hoarding, he eventually arranged for his entire massive Paul Klee collection to be donated to the Albertina in Vienna and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art upon his death.
He just gave it all back to the public.
He did.
The science funded the art, and the art healed the scientist. Carl Djerassi passed away in 2015 at the age of 91, but his impact is quite literally everywhere you look. From the demographics of our modern world shaped by the pill, to the AI analyzing our data, to the artist colonies fostering new voices.
It's a legacy that touches so many different spheres.
It really is. When you step back and look at his life, the major takeaway for you listening is that the massive, impenetrable wall between the lab coat and the theater stage is a complete illusion. You do not have to choose just one path.
Absolutely not.
Djerassi proved that you can be deeply, rigorously analytical and profoundly creative at the exact same time. You can care obsessively about the atomic weight of a molecule, and you can care deeply about the hidden egos and moral compasses of the people studying those molecules.
He fundamentally refused to accept that human curiosity should be confined to a single, neat little box. He followed his questions wherever the truth led, whether that pursuit required a spectrophotometer, a complex artificial intelligence algorithm, or a wooden stage full of actors.
And that brings us to a final, lingering thought for you to mull over today as we wrap up this deep dive. Carl Djerassi used the power of fiction and theater to expose the hidden truths, the massive egos, and the quiet moral dilemmas of the scientific community of his era.
A vital contribution.
So think about the world we live in right now. If Carl Djerassi were alive and writing his science and theater today, what hidden truths, what massive egos, and what messy moral dilemmas about our modern tech and AI industries do you think are just waiting to be exposed through the art of tomorrow?
Now, that is a profound question. We are certainly living in an era ripe for its own Djerassi.
Until next time, keep questioning the boxes they try to put you in and keep diving deep.